Good afternoon, everybody. We're glad you're here for this session. This is my favorite session of the day, my favorite session in Black Hat, in fact. One note in advance, please silence all of your mobile devices. If there are too many interruptions from calls during the talk, we're going to lock the doors and start again from scratch. Since we're recording this, we're going to get a nice, good recording. If you haven't yet stopped by the business hall located in Mandalay Bay, Oceanside and Shoreline ballrooms on level 2, I think you're pretty much out of time. You'll need to run over there at the end of the talk. But I think you have a little bit more time to stop by the merchandise store on level 2. And on every level, including right outside here, you can get the session recordings from SOK. My name is Dr. John Griffin, and it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to the Islander EI Ballroom. Hopefully you're in the right place for today's talk on Everybody Be Cool, This is a Robbery. As you know, not every Black Hat talk has a title as cool as that, so I'm expecting the talk will be just as good. And it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Jean-Baptiste Bédrune and Gabriel Campana.
Hi everyone, I am Jean-Baptiste, this is Gabriel, and today we'll talk about the security of HSM. So we both work at the Donjon, which is a leisure security team, and our daily job is to assess the security of our products, and also to evaluate the security of the products that are integrated in our solutions. They can be third-party products. And for this reason, we had to evaluate an HSM. And we will present today the results of this evaluation. So first, I will explain briefly what is an HSM, a hardware security module. And I will detail the specificities of the HSM we assessed. Then, as most of our research is about the PKCS 11 layer of the HSM, I will detail the standard. We had to develop a few tools to have a better understanding of the internals of the device and to ease the vulnerability discovery and the exploitation. We will present them briefly, and we'll talk about the vulnerability discovery and the exploitation. Eventually, we'll show how we broke the integrity of the device, allowing us to install any firmware on the HSM, and how to implant a persistent backdoor that survive a firmware upgrade. So let's go. So what is an HSM? The goal of an HSM is to protect your keys, your encryption keys. So it is a security enclave that is able to generate, to store, and to use your secrets to perform cryptographic operations with them. So the main idea is that the keys never leave the device. They stay always, most of the time actually, in the memory of the HSM or on the persistent storage of the device. So an HSM can be either an internal card, like a PCI Express card, either an external device, such as a network appliance most of the time. And it's composed of standard components, plus one or more crypto processors to speed up cryptographic operations or to make them more secure, to avoid side channel attacks, things like that. And most of them also have anti-tampering countermeasures. That means that if you try to attack the HSM physically, it will delete itself, it will delete all of its secrets, and you will get nothing. So when these devices are used, actually when your keys are highly sensitive. The major example is the public key infrastructures. So actually, all of your certificate authorities use HSM to deliver certificates. So the private key of the certificate authorities is always stored in an HSM, and that will be this device that will generate the certificates, that will sign the certificates. They can be also used in banking environments to personalize your credit card, or to verify your CVV or your PIN code and so on. And they can be also used in telco operators. For example, they are always used by telco operators, actually, to authenticate you on the mobile network. So they are almost everywhere in corporate environments when you have to manage long-term keys, but they are not well studied in security. Why? I'd say for two reasons. The first one is that this is an expensive device, so a research lab cannot buy a device just for testing. And the second one is that they are most of the time in production, and they are often disconnected from the corporate network, and they contain long-time secrets that cannot be erased. So they are most of the time out of the scope during pen tests, because if you attack it a bit too much, all of its secrets will be deleted, and that's not a good thing for companies, obviously. So here is the HSM we assessed. This is a PCI Express card. You can see it on the right. It is encircled in red on the right. And what you can see is that you see nothing, actually. It's fully black. Why? Because it is coated in epoxy resin. So all the components are coated, and you cannot access them directly. This HSM is certified FIPS 142 level 3. I'll say a bit later what it is. And the same model also exists as a network appliance. So the only difference between the two models is that this model does not have an Ethernet connector, but it has an Ethernet controller. So I think our study also applies on the network appliance version of the HSM, but we are not sure of this. So we installed the card in a standard Linux server, install the tools provided by the vendor, a couple of kernel modules and command line utilities, and we started our analysis. So looking at the source code of the drivers allowed us to understand the communication between the host, the Linux server, and the HSM. So actually the communication is done by reading and writing to a shared DRAM, which is on the PCI card, on the HSM card. And by reading and writing data, you can have basic communication stuff. So all the communication is initiated by the host, by the server. The HSM receives this buffer, process it, and write its response to another buffer, and send it back, which is read back by the server. So it can be seen as a standard client-server communication. I will now make a small demo of what we did. We are in the context when an attacker controls the host, the Linux server, and he can communicate with the PCI card. But he has no login information, so actually he can normally do nothing on the HSM. So here it is. You can see on the left the shell of the attacker, and on the right a tool, a monitoring tool we wrote to understand what's going on a bit on the HSM. So you can see on the right that there are authentication that always fail because the attacker has no login information and is now running an exploit. So he starts to do a bit of PKCS 11 stuff and manages to take a bit of control of the HSM. You can see now that the shellcode has been executed on the HSM, and the login authentication on the right succeeded now. Finally, a new module is uploaded on the HSM. We upload some code on it, and the HSM is reset. So there's no communication with it now. Once it has been reset, a new module has been loaded, and the attacker has now full control of the device. You can now, for example, list the processes on it, and we can see that you can run these commands with root privileges. So this is a full takeover of the device, and we will explain later what we can do with that. So as I said before, our HSM is certified, and actually the standard doesn't give much information, doesn't give much guarantee about the security of the software running on the device, because the level 1 certification just means that your device has an approved encryption algorithm. So if it does like AES correctly, it can be certified. The above levels just mean that your device is protected against physical attacks. So if you try to attack physically the device, usually with a certain probability, this attack will be detected, and all the sensitive data will be erased from the device. So this is not a certification about the software attacks. So I will now explain PKCS 11. As I said before, most of our research is about the standard. So what is PKCS 11? It is a generic interface to communicate with a cryptographic device. This device can be either a smart card, for example, or an HSM, or actually any device that is able to perform cryptographic operations. And the standard defines a portable API, which is called CryptoKey. And this API tells us, gives us the ability to perform cryptographic operations on the device, like encrypting data, decrypting data, generating digital signatures, and so on. So the API in itself is not very rich. There are a few dozen functions, like 70 functions, but most of these functions can be parameterized using mechanisms. And there are a lot of mechanisms, more than 300 in the standard. And vendors also add their own mechanisms to enrich the API. So this actually gives us a good attack surface for the device. So what are mechanisms? Mechanisms define how to perform a cryptographic operations. So there are mechanisms for encryption, decryption, digital signature, key derivation, key generation, and so on. And these mechanisms depend on the device. So for example, on a smart card, you will have a few mechanisms one or two mechanisms to encrypt data, for example, with AES or FreeDES, or one mechanism to generate an RSA key, and one mechanism to sign with this RSA key. And that's mainly everything you have on a smart card. On the contrary, on the HSM, you will have a lot of mechanisms because it's a device which is far more rich. You will have mechanisms for authenticated encryption, like for extensions for telco operators, extensions for the banking world, and so on. So actually, the attack surface is quite huge, as we will see later. These mechanisms work on objects. What are objects? There are three kinds of objects defined by the standard. Then they can be either keys, either certificates, or either data. Data is not that much interesting. There are often domain parameters for DSA or ACDSA. What's interesting for us, obviously, are the keys, and mainly the private keys and the secret keys. So the objects are not manipulated directly by PKCS 11 clients. They are manipulated through their handle. I will explain now how cryptographic operation is done on the HSM. So first, on the left, you have a client that want to encrypt that data with a key. First, it will ask the HSM to generate a key. The HSM will generate this key and store its value on in its memory. Then it will return a handle to the client. The client then will start an encryption operation using this handle. It will then send the data to be encrypted, and the HSM will return the encrypted data. So, as you can see, the key is never revealed to the client. It stays in the HSM space, and we will see that normally there's no way to extract it in certain conditions. An object is actually composed of several attributes. Each object has a class. In that case, this is a private key, and it has various attributes that depends on that class. For example, the value of the key is an attribute. It has also an attribute telling that this key can be used to sign data. It has no attribute to say that says that that key can be used to encrypt data. So actually, this is just a signing key. And this is more example. And what I want to say here is that attributes are actually critical for security. I will mention 3 attributes now. The first one is the private attribute. If an object has this attribute, it means that it cannot be accessed until a user is authenticated. Now the sensitive attribute. If an object is sensitive, that means its value, which is often the secret value for a key, means that this value cannot be extracted directly. It must be wrote. That means encapsulated using another encryption key, which is usually stored on the HSM. So the plain text value of the key is never revealed from the outside of the HSM. Then I'll talk about the extractable attribute. If that attribute is set, that means is not set. That means that the value of the key cannot be extracted at all, even wrote. So that it stays in the memory of the HSM and cannot be sent to a client. So every objects are bound to a token. Actually, when a client connects to the HSM or to a smart card, it will open a slot and will get access to a token. Every object belongs to a token, and when a user connects to a token, he has only access to the objects that are present in that token. So, for example, if a user connects to the token on the left, he will not be able to access to the objects that are stored on the token on the right. So there's a logical separation between objects in the standard. That allows us to define a threat model for the HSM, a basic threat model. So, for example, an attacker who does not authenticate it to the HSM is not able to extract private objects. An attacker that connects to a given slot must not be able to connect to other slots and so on. But we will consider a much simpler model. We'll tell that we'll consider only the case where an attacker is not authenticated, and we want to be able to dump all the secrets for all the objects and all of these secrets from all the slots. So the security of crypto key has been extensively detailed in the past, but our contribution is a bit different, is quite different actually. We do not concentrate on the standard, but on a specific implementation. And we also detail the internals of an HSM, which I think has never been done before. So let's go with the vulnerability research and exploitation. So we consider the case where an attacker is able to communicate with the HSM. He has taken control of the host, for example, by exploiting a service exposed on the host or something like that. We started our analysis by analyzing the tools provided by the vendor. There was an interesting documentation which was fairly complete, one for the developers, one for the administrators, and a few examples and so on. But what was really interesting for us was that there was a firmware update provided by the vendor. And that firmware update was just signed, not encrypted. And it was quite easy to extract. First thing we saw is that it was running an old Linux kernel released 10 years ago. So we were quite sure that not everything was up to date on this device. The device, the firmware was composed of very few binaries then, only one executable, I think, and a quite big crypto library, crypto key library that contains all the crypto key implementation. And The code was not very difficult to understand, but it was quite huge. So we spent quite several weeks to really understand it. One of the unexpected options on this HSM, we were quite happy with that, is that this HSM can run third-party code. You can upload modules on it that will be executed on the device. So this is not a vulnerability at all. It's really a feature, and it requires admin privileges to load code on it. The standard use for this is to add new mechanisms, for example, or to isolate code from the host. If you have a super secret algorithm and you don't want to be exposed on the host, you upload it on the HSM and it will be directly executed on the device and never revealed to the host. Modules are actually libraries that are loaded by the main executable of the HSM, and they run on the context of the main executable. As I said, there was a single binary on the device allowing quite nothing for us, and we wanted to have a better understanding of the internals of the device. So the first module we developed was a modified version of BudsyBox that was able to run on the device. So we modified the input and output of the utilities so they pass through the crypto key channel, and that worked. And we saw that the main process was running as root, and that was quite good. And we saw also that there was only one process running on the device. We were quite sure having just a shell would not be enough for exploitation. So we decided to also develop a debugger for the HSM, also in a module, and we modified GDB server for it. We adapted GDB server, and it was quite tricky because the only communication channel is ensured by the main process with the host. So if you debug the main process, obviously there will be no communication at all with the outside, and you will be stuck. So we had to develop a new communication mechanism with the outside world using again the shared DRAM. That was quite tricky, but that finally worked. From all of this, we were quite happy because we were able to debug the HSM, run command on it. It was almost user-friendly. And we saw also that everything was running as root. And what was super interesting for us is that there was no secure boot on the device. That means that if we are able to modify the firmware stored on the HSM, it will reboot. As there's no secure boot. So let's see. A few words on the storage. So all of this persistent storage is on the flash memory. And that flash memory cannot be accessed directly. As I said, it's covered by epoxy resin. And if you try to dump it, you have 100% chances that it will erase itself. One very interesting partition on this flash storage is the one that contains the crypto key, the PKCS 11 objects. They contain all the keys. A few words on the storage. Actually, this partition uses proprietary file system. I think this is to ensure secure deletion of the object. As it is a flash device, they wanted to make sure that if you delete a PKCS 11 object, it is really deleted from the flash. So actually, on this partition, objects are stored plain text, but sensitive attributes are encrypted. So if you dump only the flash, you will not get access to the objects, right? To the interesting value of the objects. Actually, the encryption key is stored on an external memory, and that memory, that component only holds the encryption key. And this is this component that is immediately deleted when you try to access the HSM physically. So to be able to dump all the objects from an HSM, from this HSM, you have to dump both the key and the partition of the flash. What we can say also is that there's no logical separation across the HSM slots. So if you are able to dump the flash and the key, you have access to all the objects on the device. As everything runs as root, we can be almost sure that a single code execution on the device allows us to dump all of the secrets. And that's what Gabriel will present now.
Thanks to Jean-Baptiste, you know everything about HSM internals, and I will now explain how we did our vulnerability research and how we wrote exploits. So we first started by looking for usual vulnerabilities such as Stack Overflow, and we did a quick manual analysis. We searched for memcopy calls with variable size parameters, memcopy calls inside cryptokey functions, because these functions can usually be called from the host. There is only one function that was vulnerable, which is Milnage derive, which is an authentication algorithm found in Universal Mobile Telecommunication System. Here is the pseudocode of this function. As you can see, there is a call to memcopy with a size with no check on the with no limits with no check on the size. The value is copied into the stack, and the value is controlled by the attacker, which can put an arbitrary data inside this value thanks to a call to create secret key. So using a few calls to cryptokey functions, gaining code execution is trivial because there is no mitigations at all, there is no stack cookie and no ASLR, for instance. However, there are a few drawbacks. For instance, resuming execution is tricky because the critical data on the stack is overwritten during the Stack Overflow. Moreover, the call to create secret key requires to be authenticated, and this algorithm is only present in recent version of the firmware. So we started to look for better bugs. We tried to automate this process thanks to a fuzzing architecture, and we set up a dump fuzzer. We mutated messages sent from the host to the HSM. We created a test suite thanks to the cryptokey usage examples, which cover almost every call to cryptokey. As I said, the fuzzing strategy is really trivial. We just mutate random bytes from the messages. We face two main challenges. The first one is that the host kernel module that transfers the messages to the HSM is not super robust. Actually, a few messages make this module crash, which isn't really convenient to have an automated fuzzer. So we had to filter these messages. Other messages triggered out-of-memory situation on the HSM. So once again, we had to use one of the modules that we developed before to modify the configuration of the Linux OS which is running on the HSM. Finally, we had a completely automated fuzzing architecture, and we found about 15 vulnerabilities, all of them being memory corruption bugs. So in the next part of the presentation, I will explain two bugs that we found. The first one is very close to Heartbleed. Using cryptokey calls, we can create objects on the HSM. We can also set attributes and retrieve attributes from these objects. Here is the pseudocode of a function that is vulnerable. there is a call to malloc in order to allocate the memory representing the data of an attribute. If you look closely at this code, you will notice that the size given to malloc and the size given to memcopy are different. That means that if these two sizes are different, some part of the data that is copied into the value of the attribute will not be fully initialized. So we develop quick exploits, and we can see the output of the exploit on the right. An attacker is thus able to leak the heap of the HSM. We managed to leak, for instance, the password of the administrator. We think that depending on the layout of the memory, we can leak sensitive data such as cryptographic key. However, once again, an authentication is required, so we looked for other bugs. The further found a crash in another crypto key function. The HSM manipulates digest using crypto key functions. There are two calls: get operation state and set operation state that can be used to retrieve the state of a digest object and also to restore this state later. The further mutates the serialized data before restoring it. I think that this mechanism is really close to what is called serialization on languages such as PHP or Python. So we had a crash because of a single byte mutated by the fuzzer. The root cause of the crash looked like an null-deref, which is pretty meaningless, but the stack trace was unusual. So we did some reverse engineering and some dynamic analysis thanks to the debuggers that we developed before. And we found out that it is actually a type convergent bug. The byte which is modified by the fuzzer describes the type of the digest object. So if we modify these bytes, we can call unexpected methods on digest objects. We then transformed this bug into useful exploits primitives. The first one is a memory leak in order to retrieve interesting addresses from the heap and the stack. And the second primitive that we gain is a relative write primitive, which allows to write arbitrary data after a given object. So we spent some time to develop an exploit. It isn't straightforward at all because we faced many challenges. But at the end, we had a reliable exploit which provide us arbitrary code execution. But the game is not over because we still have to find a useful payload. In contrary to usual target, we were not allowed to execute just a shell or something like that. Simply because there is no interesting binary on the HSM. For instance, there is no shell, nothing like that. And even if there were a shell, we wouldn't be able to communicate with the host because there is no network mechanism, for instance. So we stepped back and did something easier. We patched the code that is running on the HSM to disable the pin verification function that allows an attacker to log in as admin without knowing any credentials. Once it is done, we can install a custom module, which, for instance, dump the entire memory of the HSM and also the decryption key. So here is a quick demonstration. For the sake of the demo, let's say that the administrator on the HSM host installs some secret keys. Then the attacker logs into the HSM and, thanks to the exploit that we developed before, dump the entire memory of the HSM and along the encryption key. So that is stored into a file, a flash.bin, that the attacker copies on his server. And from this moment, the attacker doesn't need an access to the HSM anymore. Everything can be done offline. So using some tools, he can extract the files from the dump of the flash memory. For instance, here, he lists every files that are stored on the first slot of the HSM. Then, given the encryption key, he will dump every secret of the object. It's worth noting that the attributes are marked as sensitive and non-extractable. But knowing this encryption key, he can still decrypt them. So that's it. An attacker can dump and decrypt every secret that are stored on the HSM. So we found a few memory corruption bugs. We wondered if it was possible to gain persistence on the HSM. So we found a logical bug, a firmware signature bypass that can be exploited after having gained code execution on the HSM. First, I will explain how custom modules are installed on the HSM, because it is pretty similar to how firmware is updated. First, a certificate is generated on the client machine locally, and then the public key of the certificate is sent to the HSM. The HSM sends back the handle of the certificate, and the client sends the binary of the module along the signature of the module. The HSM verifies the signature of the module, and if it is valid, then the module is written into the flash memory of the HSM, and the HSM reboots. The firmware update is really similar, but there is the certificate that is used to sign the update isn't known by the client. There is only a public key that is installed that is hard-coded into the firmware. Firmware updates are available on the vendor website and can be installed using an admin account, just using a single command. So the difference is that the HSM will first search for the certificate thanks to a specific attribute. This attribute cannot be set by a client. It's not possible. So thanks to this attribute, the HSM retrieves the certificate, and the client, using the handle, sends the update binary. And if the signature is valid, then the HSM installs the update and reboots. However, there is a logical flaw. Because an attacker can install a random certificate without any attribute, without any specific attribute. Reusing the handle of this certificate, the update mechanism will work without any check. So that's all. That's actually pretty simple. It allows us to install a malicious updates. As I will show in the next part, that will allow us to gain persistence. I think that gaining persistence on a HSM is obviously interesting for an attacker because he will access the HSM after a reboot or even after a legitimate firmware upgrade. So how can we find a place to write a backdoor? Well, the only persistent memory that exists on the HSM is the flash memory, because the memory is not reset across reboot. This flash memory contains almost everything: the bootloader, the firmware, and obviously the data of the HSM. The HSM operating system has read and write access to this memory. An attacker can reuse this primitive to write its backdoor into the file system. Writing the backdoor is actually not straightforward because there are two constraints. The first one is there is not much memory available, not much RAM memory available on the HSM. So we cannot upload a lot of tools to do whatever we want. We really have to keep a really small backdoor. Additionally, there is no second chance. Because if we fail at writing a valid image into the flash memory, the HSM will not boot anymore, and there is no way to make it work again. So that means that we have to buy a new HSM if we fail at writing a correct backdoor. That's pretty expensive, so we must be very careful. Once we gained a deep understanding of the update mechanism, we were able to write our backdoor. It is a shared library that is preloaded into the main process of the HSM during the startup. This implant does two things. The first one is to hook the update mechanism to survive across legitimate updates, and also to hook some crypto key functions, for instance, to backdoor the random generator. I will continue on a quick demo. This is the source code of a program that is executed on the host, and we can see a call to generate random, which is made on the host, which is actually done on the HSM to retrieve some random data. So here is the source code of this program. So there is a backdoor that is installed on the HSM. We run this program to get 1 byte of random memory, or 4 bytes, 16 bytes, or more data, 128 bytes. And I think that you noticed a pattern. The data is not random at all. That's because we backdoor the random generator. We just patched one of the functions of the crypto key table. So this part of the backdoor is trivial. The difficult part is writing the backdoor to the file system. To sum it up, we did vulnerability research to find a vulnerability that allows us to gain arbitrary code execution without any credential on the HSM, that is a pre-authentication exploit. There is still an open question. We don't know if our exploit will work against network HSM. We think so, but we don't have any network version of this HSM to confirm that hypothesis. Once we gain arbitrary code execution, we are able to dump the whole flash memory along the encryption key, and that allows an attacker to decrypt every secret of the HSM. We also found a vulnerability that allows to bypass the firmware signature, which breaks entirely the HSM integrity and allows an attacker to gain persistence on the HSM. We reported every vulnerability to the vendor, who issue a new firmware update after a few weeks. And we would like to highlight that this update is available for the latest model of the HSM, but also for models that aren't supported anymore because the vulnerabilities are critical. So obviously, pay attention to your vendor security advisories. Finally, we'd like to remind that it is not an exhaustive study. We only assess the security of a single model of HSM and of a specific vendor. We will be really curious about the security of other models and other vendors. We hope that it gives some methodology to look for vulnerabilities for other security researchers, that we will see other studies in the future. And finally, HSM are certified against hardware attacks, but it doesn't make much sense if the software running on HSM is insecure. So we would love to see initiative about to have secure software running on HSM, obviously. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. And if you'd like to ask questions, we have a few minutes for that. Just please use the microphones in the middle of the room.
Hi, I was curious, did the HSM audit logs record any of your attempts?
So the question is there any logs of exploit attempts on the HSM? I would say no, because our exploits are only crypto key calls, and it is expected. So our exploit doesn't leave any trace on the HSM logs.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for joining the session. If any further questions, you could please meet the presenters in the wrap-up room. Thank you.